All right, here we go. Open Analysis Live. So today I'm going to show you guys how to walk through unpacking a sample that I was asked to take a look at. It wouldn't run in a sandbox, and actually if we just pop over here to where it was run in hybrid analysis, if you scroll down to the behavior here, yeah, so you can see that it ran itself, and it didn't, there was no injection or anything. There's no real behavior. And so a friend of mine asked me to take a look at this manually and try and figure out why it didn't run, and if it was packed, to try and unpack it. So today it's like a walkthrough. I'm not like doing it completely live. So you'll see some of the samples already have like breakpoints in them and stuff like that. But I will hopefully try to explain the steps as best I can so that you guys can follow along. And I can tell you up front that this one actually is a little bit more difficult than the standard packers. There's two stages. The first stage is really simple. This is just a simple trick I'll show you guys. But the second stage is a lot more complicated, especially if you're not familiar with how like the different techniques for injection, because this is definitely a non-standard one. So I'm going to break this video down into like two parts, or I guess into two videos, this unpacking tutorial into like two videos. So the first one is going to be the first stage. It should be quick. The second one's going to be a little bit more involved. And before we get into it, I just want to show you my setup here. So I have two VMs running. Here's my Windows VM that I have IDA running on. And I have over here, I have an old XP VM that I'm going to use as the box that gets infected. And I'm using IDA's remote debugger. So everybody's probably familiar with that. If you're not, it's bundled with IDA. It allows you to remote debug in other between hosts. And because it's VMware, all you have to do is make sure that you have a virtual network connection that allows the VMs to talk to each other. I know that a lot of you are probably, seasoned reverse engineers and you hate IDA's debugger. I'm just using it because I want to show you guys what the binaries look like when they're mapped in memory. And I think IDA does a pretty good job of like displaying it in an intuitive way. Even though the debugger may not be all that great, it's good for like tutorials. So that's why I'm going to use it today. I think it's easier if you're not as familiar with like how processes run, how they're mapped, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a little bit easier interface. So without further ado, this is the sample. Like I said, I'll put a link to it below. It's here's the SHA sum, and we've called it owu.exe. So the first thing I'm going to do is load it up in IDA, and we'll take a look at it here. So also for the setup here, the way I have it set up is I have a shared folder that's shared between the two VMs. So this is kind of a trick. I mean, it's not, I'll load the existing one. So this setup is like a little bit dangerous because if you have ransomware and it gets away from you in one of the VMs, it can obviously encrypt everything in the share folder. So if you have like, if you have like a notepad or something that you're keeping your notes on in the share folder, that'll get encrypted. So it's not like the safest way, but I think if you're careful, you know what you're doing, it's definitely a lot easier than having to like load the binaries between the two VMs. Just keep them in the share folder. So here we've loaded up this beast. I've already set up the remote debugger settings, but I'm just going to show you guys again in case anybody doesn't know how to do this. So the way it works is on your victim VM, you drop this Win32 remote, which is just in one of the IDA folders. It's in like the debug server folder. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, it's in one of the folders in like the IDA program directory. So when you run it, it just opens a port and starts listening. It opens a debugger and starts listening for an IDA connection. So here we can see this is the IP of the VM. And if we pop back to IDA, you can see we've chosen remote Windows debugger. And if we go to process options, you can see that our IP is set for the for the victim VM. So I also sort of like to just, when I get rolling here, just add a breakpoint at the beginning of the start, so I can just roll through and have it stop on start. I'm also going to disable these breakpoints here. This guy right here I'm going to disable to show you what it looks like when you try to run it blind. So if we run this, we stop on start, and then we're just going to run. And if we pop over to our victim VM, you can see, it's running, and it looks like maybe it's doing some unpacking, some CPU intensive stuff. You can see the process is a little bit high. One thing I want to note, I am using Process Explorer because I like to take a look at what's actually going on while I'm debugging. But I just renamed the exe to ptool instead of Process Explorer, because sometimes some of these like Mickey Mouse malware samples will actually try and check running processes for their like image name on disk, and they'll check for like Process Explorer, and then they won't run if it says Process Explorer. Anyway, quick tip, just change the executable name and you won't have to deal with that crap. So if we pop back to IDA, we can see, we have some sort of exception here. I don't know. So we'll dig into this in a minute. So I'm just going to keep running. I'm just going to pass that to the application. We get another one. I'm just going to keep running, pass it to the application. Okay, it stopped. Let's go back to our victim, and no injected processes. Doesn't seem to have done anything. So we can see that there's probably some sort of AntiDebugger check or anti-analysis check that's stopping this from running. Maybe because we saw those exceptions, maybe it's one of those, maybe it's like an exception handler control flow grab AntiDebugger, but that doesn't make a lot of sense because it didn't run in hybrid analysis either. So maybe it's like an anti-VM check. I'm not really sure what's going on here. And there is one thing that I can do right now that's a little bit dangerous, but I just want to make sure it's not an anti-VM check, because we are in a VM. So I'm just going to actually grab a copy of that sample, and I'm going to run it without the debugger. Oh yeah, my so I have a problem with this VM where the share folders sometimes go back. Sometimes it takes a while for them to connect up. So I'm just going to drag this guy over. Yeah, I want to copy it, and then I'm going to run him, and I'm taking a look here. Okay, looks like he's doing the same thing. He's unpacking maybe, or he's doing something. Still running, hasn't exited yet. I don't see any errors popping up, like I don't see any exceptions popping up from it. So let's give it a minute. He's still running hot. Okay, stopped. And injection. All right, let's pause this guy right here. Okay. So if you guys caught that real quick, it looks like it started a new version of itself, probably for injection, and then that started on a version of explorer.exe, probably for more injection. So it looks like we have two stages, and we know that it's not an anti-VM check because it ran fine in this VM. I'm just going to kill this process here. Yes, please. Goodbye. All right. So when this happens, this is like a trick that I want to talk about here. So when we have a scenario where something doesn't run in an online sandbox like Cuckoo or hybrid analysis, it doesn't run in IDA, it throws some exceptions, but it does run in a VM when you just run it. There's one check that you should immediately go to, and this is kind of a trick that that's been known for a while, and I'm not even sure if people use it as like an anti-debug trick. Like maybe they do, or maybe they're just like lazy. So the issue here is that when the process goes to get a handle, like to open the file that's on disk, it's like the malware file that's on disk, the debugger can already have a handle open. It's possible that it may already have a handle open to that file. So if open file or create file is called with exclusive access, so with no share privileges enabled, you won't get a handle. It'll fail. The call will fail. So this is like a way to check whether there's already a handle open to the malware file on disk. And it's an okay like anti-debug check. But you can see with Cuckoo and with hybrid analysis, and maybe with Joe Sandbox, I think, but don't quote me on this, maybe with Joe Sandbox as well, they actually, as part of their like analysis, they'll open a handle to the image. So it'll fail. So this check will fail in a sandbox as well. So that's why when I see something that like fails with the debugger, fails in Cuckoo or like in a sandbox, but runs in a VM, if I just run it, I always check for this first, just to see whether this is the problem. And like I was saying before, I'm not even sure if this is like, it's not always an anti-debug trick. Sometimes it's just the developers are lazy, so they don't include like share access because they just assume that like, you know, nothing's gonna have a handle open to the malware that they just dropped, right? Like they're not expecting that. So sometimes they won't do this consciously, but it'll stop the malware from running. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna start this up in the debugger again, and I'm going to pop over here to our modules, and I'm going to set a breakpoint on NtCreateFile. So let's see, NtDLL here. So NtCreateFile. Okay, so you can see, like I was saying before, I already did an analysis here, so this is more of a walkthrough. So I'm just going to like enable that breakpoint. And we're going to run this again, and we're going to wait and see whether this breakpoint is hit. So this could be a few minutes. Maybe if I'm not too lazy, maybe I'll edit this part out in the video and I'll speed it up until we hit here, depending on how long it takes to get here. But anyway, while we're waiting, all I'm doing here is I'm setting because sometimes like the imports will be done dynamically in malware. You can't just go to like the import table and say like, show me all instances of like CreateFile. So what I do is I like to go to the NT layer, like the lowest userland layer, and set my breakpoint there. And then I'll work backwards up the stack, up the call chain, until I get to the place in the malware itself that it was called from. So here we can see it was called. I'm just going to jump over the call, and then I'm going to single step return. Where are we here? Probably in kernel. So in kernel 32, what are we at here? Oh yeah, kernel 32 create file. All right, let's just turn that into turn this into a function, and give me a graph view so I can see where it ends. Okay, here's return. So let's just put a breakpoint here. We'll run to the return. There we go. So remember, I'm going to remove that breakpoint. All I'm doing now is I'm just walking back up the calls that led to the NtDLL call for CreateFile, because I want to find where it was called in the actual process that's running, right? In the malware. So I'm going to single step back from that. And where are we now? Oh, it looks like we're still in kernel 32, but there's a return right there. So let's just go to the return. Hey, there we go. So now we're back in our process, and you can see I've already put a label here in a debug point, but I disabled it just for the demo purpose here. So you can see this was a dynamically resolved API. You can see the call to ECX. Obviously, it was dynamically resolved. It's not a call to the import address table pointers. So that's why I did the breakpoint in NtDLL to find it. So what we're going to do now is, first, I guess I can just show you guys, if you check the return value here, you can see you have an invalid handle file, right? So it's invalid file returned. So we have like, potentially we found this trick. So potentially this is trying to open a file, open the PE file, image file on disk, and it's not getting a good handle. we can actually further verify this by just checking the arguments that are pushed in. So here the first argument is going to be the file name. Second argument is going to be permissions, I think. But the third argument is the share value right here. So it's 0. So what I'm going to do, I don't remember this off the top of my head, and it's easy for you guys to see, is I'm actually going to just pull up CreateFile. Okay, there we go, a little bit easier. So file name, yeah, desired access, and then share mode. These are like the arguments that were pushed. So if we go back to our malware, we can see that that third argument down is 0, and so that's the share mode. So let's go down and see share mode. 0 prevents other processes from opening the file if they request to delete, read, access, blah, 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 blah. Right? So really what this should be is, so if you want to share delete, share read, share write, so it's 4, 5, 6, 7. So it should be 0x7 if you want full permissions. Kind of like Unix, I guess. Maybe people knew that. I didn't know that, but yeah. So I guess that's the same sort of share permissions. So it's going to be 0x7 if you have full access to that file, if you want full share access. So let's pop back here. There's not much point in letting this continue. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop the, I'm going to stop the process. Actually, first I'm going to re-enable this breakpoint. Breakpoint, stop the process, and then I'm going to run again. I don't want to stop at start. I want to stop at that breakpoint that I just set. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change the share permissions to 0x7, and we're going to run the malware and see whether it works. So I do want to, at this point, we're going to have to talk a little bit about injection and how that works and how to do this safely. So you can see when I ran the file just by itself in the VM and it actually ran, you could see that it started a process with itself. So it started like another process of like owu.exe. And then that started another process, explorer.exe. So we're assuming that they're doing like process injection. It's the only thing that really makes sense when you see that sort of chain of processes starting other processes. So in order to do this safely, once we fix this CreateFile API call, I'm going to want to put a few more hooks in just so that I don't let the execution get away from me, because at this point I want to like dump out whatever was injected. So here we go. We stopped on our breakpoint, but just before we go any further, I'm going to set a breakpoint on create process, just so that we know like we'll just stop there and we can be a bit a little bit more safe about this. So we'll just do it in kernel 32. No need to go down to the NT layer at this point. I mean, if we screw up, it's a VM. We can always just wipe it and come back. So we're going to go look for create process. And if you guys are not familiar, so create process A and W is just ASCII and wide, right? So it depends on the string that you're passing in. But create process A, or like any of the API calls to A, the ASCII call, is actually redirecting down to the W call. So you only have to hook like the W version of the API calls, the wide string version. You don't need to hook the A calls, because the A is just diverts down to wide string. It's like changes the strings into wide and then calls the wide string version. So we're just gonna come on now. There we go. Add a breakpoint here, and then we're going to go back to where our instruction pointer is here, where we stopped. So if we look on the stack before so this is all set up to call CreateFile A. So if we look at the stack, we have our file that's going to be accessed. So this is the buffer with the file, and you can see here that it's the actually, you know what? I'll just show you guys. It should be nice and easy. So I'll open a new file, and I'm just showing you the memory address that's pointed to by that pointer on the stack. So just to show you again what I've done, so here's the pointer on the stack, here's the pointer on the stack, and it points to this string here. And you can see that string is the string of our executable. So, so again, this is just confirming that they are trying to get a handle to the executable. And if we go back here and we look at the share, so this is the third argument pushed on the stack, we can see the share permissions are 0. So what we want to do is we want to just change that over to 7, just to give it full permissions. So I'm going to just do the same trick. I'm going to go in here, I'm going to go to that address, and DDD, turn that into a D word. So here's the address where on the stack where the third argument is. And actually, if I just turn this into a D word, you can see there's the second argument. So what I want to do is I actually want to patch this, and there's lots of different ways to do that in IDA, but the easiest way that I found is just to patch it in hex mode. So we just grab this address here, copy it out, go into our hex view, go to the actual address where this is stored. Move this over so we can see it. Come on. There we go. So we can see that here's the D word, it's 0. And we're actually going to edit this, and we're just going to change it to 07, 07. And we're going to apply the changes. And then if we go back to our stack view, you can see that the share permissions are now patched to 7. So if we jump over this call, all right, I forgot I have an NT breakpoint. Let's actually go back and we'll set a breakpoint here and delete that breakpoint. Add one here, jump to IP. Oh, shoot. Oh, why did I do that? That was stupid. Set my IP back here. Stupid. All right, just delete that breakpoint. All right, we'll let it run until we come back. And now let's look. Oh, we have a valid handle, right? So no more -1. Now we have an actual handle. So this should work now. I'll just delete that extra stupid breakpoint I put in there. So if we let this run now, after having patched the CreateFile command, we should now see that CreateProcess command API, get hit, the one that we put the breakpoint on, because now there's nothing stopping the malware from running. So let's go, and there we go. Let's make sure this is right. Create process internal. Okay, looks good. So we're going to do the same thing here that we did before, where we're going to sort of walk back up the call chain until we get to the process that called this. Okay, there we go. So we're going to put a breakpoint on the return address here. We're going to run until we get here. Remove that breakpoint. We don't want them sitting around. Single step back. So let's see where we are. We're somewhere in kernel 32, but I don't really care because I see that return address is right here. Let's pop back. Oh, we're still in kernel 32. Let's get back. There we go. Okay. So now we have a nice call to, this is create process. Okay. So, so now we've returned, we're back in our, we're back in the main body of our malware now, and we've created the process. So if we go and pop over to our victim VM, we can see that we've actually created the process. It's suspended. For those of you who are not familiar with process injection, this is pretty much straight up basic process injection right now. So you create the process suspended, you inject your code, and then you resume thread. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some breakpoints where we think maybe there might be interesting stuff being injected in the process. So the ones that I'm going to try, like there's different ways to write your code into a process. There's the two most common ways are to write process memory, where you just write it directly in. And then the other one is to map a view of that process into your process, move the code over locally into that mapped process, and then that code will actually be, because it's a map, it's actually going to be moved into the target process, the suspended one. So like I said, I've already done this once. So in order to save time, I know that they're using write process. So I'm just going to put a breakpoint there. Really, if we're doing this for real, we would have to put breakpoints on all the different API calls. And I'm also going to put a breakpoint on resume thread, just in case I mess up. This is just something that I always do, because you never want to like resume thread without putting a breakpoint on it, just in case you miss some injection, or maybe your breakpoints aren't hit or something. At least that way you know that like it's not going to resume the malware without you knowing about it. At least you'll know like, oh, I screwed up. It got to resume thread and I didn't capture anything that was being injected, so I need to go back and take a second look at it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up some breakpoints here. So for this, I like to go to the NT layer again, just the lowest userland layer, because I don't want to have to hook a whole bunch of stuff. So I'd rather just pick the lowest userland hook I can. So I'm going to do this for NT resume thread. So let's see this here, NT rs resume thread. Okay, so I'll re-enable that. And I'm going to set a breakpoint on NtWriteVirtualMemory. Let's see here, write virtual memory. Like I said, I already had breakpoints. So I'm going to enable that breakpoint, and now I'm just going to run it. And every time these breakpoints are hit for write virtual memory, I'm just going to check it and see if they're writing to the process that was just started. And if they are, I'm going to dump out whatever was written. So let's let it rip. All right. So for those of you who are not familiar with the call here, basically what it is the first argument is the handle, and then you have the address where they're going to write the memory, and then there's the buffer with the actual data in it, and then there's the size of the buffer to write. So in this case, it's the handle is 54 hex. They're trying to write to offset in OWU.exe, so we definitely want to take a look at this and take a look at what they're writing. And this is the buffer that contains what they're writing. So let's take a look at what they're actually writing to the process here. Let's grab that memory address, pop over here, go to that memory address. Ooh, looks like they're writing a PE file. All right, so here's where we can get super lazy. So if we look at this again, they're writing to what looks like a base address. I mean, this is like a standard load image base address, right? So it looks like they're probably just going to overwrite the whole PE file. So when you see something like this, instead of them writing the PE in chunks, that buffer might contain the entire PE file. So what I'm going to do, just to be lazy, is I'm going to take a look at that buffer again, and I'm going to look at it in hex mode so I can see, take a better look at the whole thing. All right, there's our, looks like a PE file to me. So I'm just going to do a little scroll down and see if it looks like the whole PE file is here, and it does, right? So it looks like we've got ourselves the whole header here. Looks like we've got some text, our data section, so we expect a little bit of a jump. Looks like there's a whole bunch of data here. So let's scroll down to see where this buffer ends. It looks like there's a lot of good data in here. There's a little jump. No. Now, where would this buffer end? Let's keep scrolling down. Data. Lots of data. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for like uninitialized memory, right? So for those of you who aren't familiar, you'll see it immediately as soon as we get to the end of the buffer here. Scroll down quicker. Oh, there we go. So that's the end of the that's like uninitialized memory right here with all those E's, E, F, E, right? So so this is the entire buffer that we're gonna copy out. Looks good to me. I'm going to copy this out and see whether this thing contains the PE file. So we got to go back up to the top here, and we're gonna grab this sucker. So the way to do this is you just highlight one row, click and hold Shift, and then you can like scroll around the buffer. And I'll show you, as long as you continue to hold Shift, you can use your mouse normally. And then when it comes time to actually like highlight, where are we at here? There we go. So see, now I'm still holding Shift, and if I click here, now I've like highlighted that entire section. So I'll just show that to you again. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to highlight the PE file, and then I can like right click on it and just do like a save file. So again, I'm holding Shift, I'm scrolling down until I see the end of the buffer where there is no more memory written. I know it's coming up here soon. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to click here. So you see I've highlighted that entire section, and then I can just right click on it and save to file. So I'm just going to call this save to desktop. I'm going to call it out.bin. Okay, great. So let's open a new instance of IDA and check that binary out. So there's two ways that a binary can exist. A valid PE file can exist. It can either exist in its unmapped version. So this is the version that you would have like on disk that can be read by anything that parses a PE file. And then there's the mapped version. And the mapped version is basically it reads the section table, and then it maps each one of those sections to where it's supposed to exist in virtual memory. So if it's mapped, we just need to unmap it. If it's already unmapped, then it's just a regular PE file, and we can open it with IDA. So that's all I'm doing now. I'm just going to test and see whether I can open this with IDA, and if it complains, if it's a valid PE file. So let's open this up. Oh, okay. Looks like it's looks pretty valid. Okay. What are the imports? Okay. So it looks like we've now successfully dumped the PE file. Looks like we've actually got what was going to be injected into the process. So we don't really need that other debugger anymore. So I'll just pop over here. We can stop debugging. We don't really need it anymore. And just close this up. And so this is now the PE file that we're going to be working with, out.bin. So I'll just rename that. I'm just going to close this up here. I don't want to save the database. I have this stupid crash thing too that happens a lot with IDA. I've installed some plugins that aren't playing nice, so it keeps on crashing IDA. So here I'm just going to rename this to stage1.exe. Yes. Okay, so now that I have stage1.exe, I'm going to wrap up this section, this first section of the video, and in part 2, I will show you how to unpack stage 1. So now at this point, if you wanted to, if you want to just run this in your sandbox, this is a valid PE that we've dumped out, so you can just try and run it in your sandbox. I am going to show you in part 2. I'm going to show you the whole how to unpack it manually. But just, if you encounter this type of trick, this is just showing you quickly how to get by it. Now, there's one other thing you could have done if, let's say you have this binary and you don't actually have to manually unpack it. You just want to get past that CreateFile with the no share permissions trick. You could actually have just patched the binary to change the share value, and then that would have run in your sandbox as well. So I think what I'm going to do just to end this part 1 off is I'm just going to show you how to patch the binary so it would run in your sandbox, and then you don't have to do that extra unpacking step that I showed you guys at the end. So to do that, basically all we want to do is we want to find that CreateFile call, the API call, and remember I have it in my breakpoint saved somewhere here. So here we go. So so here it is in our in the IDA view, which is not exactly how it's going to be represented on disk. So what we want to do is, remember, we want to change the third argument here to be 0x7 with, so that's full share permissions. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually have to locate these opcodes in the binary file and then patch them with hex editor. So there is a way to do like diffs with IDA, but for a single byte patch like this, it's way quicker just to do it this way. So the way to do it is you just go into options, general, you're going to show a bunch of opcodes for each line. So here we go. So here are the actual opcodes. Like this is what it looks like in binary on disk for these functions. So we can see like push 6a and then the value that's pushed on. So what we want to look for is we want to look for probably, let's try these guys first. So let's try looking for this series of opcodes in the PE file on disk and see whether we can find those. So if this is unique, this isn't a lot of opcodes, right? So it may not be unique in the binary, but because there may be other push 8, whatever that is, like 8x, whatever. So there may be multiple of those in the binary. But what we can do is we can just see whether the surrounding codes are the same. And so, and see if we can like patch those, see if we can like locate this and then patch it. So I'm going to pop over to our, command shell, and I'm going to make a copy of owu.exe, and I'm going to call it owu.patch_patch.exe. And then I'm going to pop over to our, open up a hex editor here. So this is Synalyze It for Mac. You can use any hex editor you want. As long as it has a search functionality, it's good. So let's open up OW patched. No, I don't want that. All right, and then let's move this over so you guys can see it. So we're gonna find, okay, so it doesn't allow you to like, this is frustrating. Okay, so 683080. 6812121280. Okay, so this is where, so all we did was we searched for those hex, the opcodes hex in the binary, and we found only one instance of it. So we know this is actually going to be the instance. And if we look at the hex before, we can see 6A03, 6A00, 6A00. So if we pop back to IDA, you can see 6A03, 6A00, 6A00, 6A0080, right? So all we want to do is we just want to patch, again, I'll do this slowly so you can see. All we want to do is we want to patch this right here, this push 0 to push 7, right? So we want to change it from no share permissions to all share permissions. So if we pop back over here, 6A00, and so all we want to do is we want to do 7. That's it. Just change it, save the file, patched, close this up, and then we'll open another IDA instance. I'm going to actually look at where this is, where the offset is here. I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to compare this file now with the patch file just to make sure that we have actually patched the right place. So let's open a new instance. Okay, let's open OWA patched. Okay. All right. So it's doing its thing, doing its analysis, blah, blah, blah. We'll just give it a minute to finish. And jump to that address. Yeah. Okay. So here we can see if we compare this function, you can see that we've actually correctly, okay, let's try that again. Give me the text view, please. Okay, and go to that address. Okay, second time here. So you can see that we've correctly patched the share permissions for this call. And just to confirm, if you look at the, so this is the patch version, you can see it's push 7. And then if you were to go over to the original one, you can see it's push 0. All right. So there we go. We know that it's patched. So that, and then you can go and use that OWU patched file in your sandbox, and it should run no problem. So that concludes part 1 of the tutorial, and stay tuned for part 2. As always, share, like, subscribe, give us some feedback. This is the first in a bunch of these, hopefully, that we get to put out. I know it's kind of they're kind of long-winded, but hopefully it's useful. So do let us know. And remember, keep exposing the mechanics behind the malware, and stay curious.